So I recently wrote an article on financebycwt.com talking about a speech that Warren Buffett gave at Sun Valley, Idaho at like the Billionaire Summer Camp. And I will be reading that article in a future video and publishing it, on my YouTube channel. But in this podcast episode, I wanted to talk about why I believe that Warren Buffett is such a good, consistent investor for so long. Because the thing is, beating the S&P 500, like beating the market itself when you're investing, is something that, obviously not just Warren Buffett has done. Like there's a lot of other investors I can point to who have beaten the market. But what is rare and why I consider Warren Buffett the greatest investor of all time is because he has so consistently beaten the market for such a long time. Like there's a lot of investors you see where they basically go through like a winning streak basically. You'll see them beat the market and you'll see them the next year beat the market. Like for 5 years they might consistently beat the market during that period and then that's it. And that's considered a good thing. Like if you're an investor who spends like that long in the sun, you're a really good investor. But Warren Buffett has consistently, beaten the market. I mean, some years obviously he underperforms, and a lot lately. But I think that is absolutely amazing, and that's really what I think separates Warren Buffett from a lot of like the hedge fund leaders and other popular investors is that he's beaten it for so much longer. And I think a big part of that, I think a lot of it's addressed in the article that I produced on financebycwt.com, where he talked about how it is not really better to invest in innovation. And I want to take that a step further and say that the reason I think he is so consistently good at investing is because instead of looking for, necessarily like the next big thing or the next big market, he more looks at just fundamentals themselves. Like if you look at his popular or like most consistent investments, like a lot of what he invests in is insurance. And the reason he invests in insurance is not necessarily because he believes the whole insurance market, would 10x over the next few years. It's because it's a very consistent cash flow producing business. It's one that's always going to give him cash to invest with. It's always going to have a float. It's just a consistent business to be in. Like you look at See's Candy, and obviously it has been a good investment, but I'd be willing to bet that he didn't necessarily invest in it because he thought, the candy market would 10x or that candy was the future of business. But he invested in it because it's a business that was consistently bring cash flow. Like, look at the actual fundamentals. He looked at year-over-year growth. He looked at how much revenue is actually being produced, how much of that is actually converting into cash flow. And that was the big thing that made him invest. And I think that is kind of the lesson with Warren Buffett, is that, just investing into consistent cash flow producing businesses, one that will always bring cash, one that you'll always be able to profit off of, one that you'll always be able to reinvest that money. It just, over time, is the most successful strategy. By not really looking at market trends, but not really looking at or trying to study like the next big sectors. Like one thing people often criticize Warren Buffett for is missing the technology wave. And that is legit criticism. He would have made a ton of money if he had invested, but also when you look at like in the internet itself, one of the greatest inventions of all time that completely revolutionized everything. Most .com companies did go out of business during like the .com crash. And it's like, when you look at that, a lot of people that invested huge sums of money into technology stocks like early on internet companies, they didn't do well. And Buffett, who may have missed out on some absolutely amazing companies, following his strategy that made him great, has been able to become, to create one of the largest companies of all time. And I think that is something that people need to consider. And I think that's something people should celebrate him on. And, at the end of the day, I think that's what's so important. Like actually looking at the fundamentals of a stock, looking at, like, knowing your actual investment strategy and what you want from your stocks and just finding stocks to do that, not worrying about market trends like what the market's currently doing, what's actually happening with the economy itself, but just looking at the stocks themselves, looking fully at the fundamentals, and on that deciding if you should invest into the company or not. I think it's kind of proven that that is the winning strategy. Thank you for listening to this episode of Financial Deep Dive with CWT, and subscribe to whatever platform you're currently listening on, and thank you.